Well folks, we made it. This will be the final video in my Revisiting the MCU series, the epic finale that I've been teasing for 24 weeks. We've been going 24 videos, roughly about 5 months or so, 5 months and some change, that we've been doing this very consistently week by week, every single Marvel Cinematic Universe movie in release order, and we are here at the epic finale, the ranking of the MCU. Now if you have missed any of my Revisiting the MCU series, don't worry, there's a convenient little playlist up in the corner of this video that you can click and go to that playlist where you can watch them all in order, or just pick and choose which one is your favorite or least favorite, see if we agree, have any different opinions, comment on those videos, like them, share them, all that good stuff. But this has been a very long journey. I feel like that now that we're at the epic conclusion, I should have worn something like a tuxedo or a suit and tie. Instead, I'm wearing my nerd-affiliated Hey Archer tee, which you can find at heyarcher.com. Probably the closest thing I have to a nice tuxedo or suit. You can get one for yourself as well. So you head over to his website and check that out, buy yourself a nice premium tee. But without further ado, I think we should just go ahead and jump right in. But let me preface before we actually do so that these are my personal rankings. These are nothing to do with anything official. This is just how I would prefer to rank them from worst to best. But to be honest with you, I have flip-flopped a few even while writing this video. So I think there may be some changes slightly here and there, but I think this is about as final as I'm gonna get it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in with the worst Marvel movie, number 24 on my list, which is...
All right, Jarvis, but it's only half done with.
This one may come as a shock to a lot of people, like why put Iron Man 3 as the worst MCU movie? And as a lot of you may know, I am not the biggest Iron Man fan. In fact, I made that clear from the very first Iron Man review. But this movie has to be some of the most boring storytelling I have ever seen. It's the shadow of Tony Stark that has a glowing Guy Pearce, a terrible story for the Mandarin, and nearly zero regard for Iron Man as a character. And much like the MCU, this movie just gives another of Tony's demons a crack at taking him down. Then they even try to add a kid and Christmas themes. It just doesn't work for me. Just about nothing in this movie works for me, and that's why it's dead last on my list. And this is the movie that you probably thought would be the lowest of the low, but no. Thor: The Dark World isn't a fantastic movie and is in fact quite forgettable, but the bones of a good story is there. It gets wrapped up trying to make things too dramatic and mixes in stories that are too complicated for a casual viewer or even a Marvel superfan to enjoy. I think the criticism for Thor: The Dark World is harsh, not overly wrong, but harsh. It does have some good humor and a better chance for Tom Hiddleston's Loki to shine a bit more, but that being said, it still isn't a phenomenal movie or one that should likely be revisited anytime soon. Another Iron Man movie. But this one I think is redeemable, though I'm sure most would disagree. Iron Man 2 gave us Rhodey 2.0, Natasha Romanoff aka Black Widow, a highly underrated Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer, and even a somewhat interesting story of the arc reactor in Tony's chest killing him. But it does suffer very badly from a weak villain that really no one cares about. This, plus some lacking visual elements when it comes to characters in suit, really hurt this movie. It's an attempt at a sequel, but it also just a bunch of what I can only call Iron Man tropes thrown into a blender and was rushed to the masses before anyone can stop and say, hey, maybe we should do something else. This one was a tough one to place, but once I considered the majority of this movie was forgettable despite one or two scenes, it began to click into place. The Incredible Hulk isn't bad per se, it's more of a misguided and only vaguely connected MCU movie. It does give us a better Hulk than the Ang Lee 2003 Hulk, but it still tries to give a larger, more complex story to what is essentially a big green rage monster. That being said, I can only enjoy pieces of this movie, such as the campus battle and the final fight between Hulk and Abomination. That alone puts this movie head and shoulders above the previous entries, and though this was only the second MCU movie, there were a lot of decent moments and character development that make this a watchable but also easily forgettable entry. We haven't even cracked the top 15 and already we have 2 Iron Man and 2 Thor movies on this list. Wow. The first Thor film was actually not that bad. What hurt it most was the direction and overly serious approach it took with itself. The direction had way too many angle shots and felt almost as disorienting as Doctor Strange, and though Thor had its funny moments, he was very straight-laced for the most part, which just left a very odd feeling when watching it. Plus, the blonde eyebrows didn't help. Like, I get what they were going for, but it just looks really weird. It also gave us Jane Foster, a smart scientist who immediately becomes a cliche bumbling moron the second she sees Thor. Though I must say I did like the Asgard aspects, and this movie used good Marvel connections, with the Hawkeye watching over Thor's hammer and Thor coming to take it back in the rain. That scene actually was pretty cool and kind of sold this movie for the most part for me. The first female superhero movie from Marvel, and honestly, it is extremely forgettable. Brie Larson does a decent job as Captain Marvel, and though there are a lot of interesting aspects to this movie, such as her forgotten past and the Skrulls, unfortunately they're not used to their full potential. In the end, this just ends up being a movie you don't remember being bad, but it also leaves no real lasting impression. And despite having cool visuals and style when it comes to the actual hero aspects, this movie was primarily just a lead up and reason to shoehorn her character into Avengers Endgame to save Tony and have a quick fight with Thanos. Other than that, there was no real rhyme or reason to this attempt at a female-led superhero movie. Marvel's biggest little hero hit the big screen in a very unique way. This certainly wasn't a character I cared even a little bit about, but the main appeal was Paul Rudd, whose charisma and charm carry the full weight of this movie. And despite having some fun use of CGI and the element of Ant-Man's abilities, the story is severely lacking. And once again, Marvel delivers a very forgettable villain. I really wish that Edgar Wright had been able to stay fully on board with this one, as I think his style would have brought an extra puzzle piece to this movie that could have landed at a much higher spot on this list, but yeah, I guess we'll never truly know the answer to that. But for now, it's an okay movie with an okay high story and an amazing lead actor. The long overdue solo film and what should have been the first female-led superhero movie, Black Widow overpromised and underdelivered. Had this movie come out in the actual MCU timeline as the other films had, it would have made a lot more sense. But having been delayed and giving us a story of a character we already know the end to leaves us with a feeling of just, I don't care. Add this in combination to a villain who was somewhat misused and a character that we've known for a decade essentially become mega superpower with any actual powers, this movie falls flat. But the one area I do give them credit for is with Florence Pugh, but considering that she's likely to take the mantle of Black Widow's spot in the future, this movie was more of an introduction to audiences as the new face of the character rather than a spotlight on a character that long deserved her moment in the sun prior to this. So all in all, this is just a missed opportunity at almost every front. It hurts me to put this one so low on this list because I really enjoyed the first film, but this is a very bloated sequel. When you think of a sequel, you always think of movies wanting to go bigger. Guardians 2 did that, and other than Yondu and Drax getting a little bit more time to shine, this movie was marginally worse than the first one. I'm not sure if it's a lightning in a bottle situation, but this movie in no way lived up to its predecessor in my mind. The music felt off with the exception of a song or two, and the CG was lacking in certain areas to fully immerse me in the story. That being said, it can still hold its own as a standalone movie outside the larger MCU, and that's what I enjoyed most about it. The Guardians can be very self-contained and not have to interact too terribly much with the MCU, but severing all ties to the MCU much like Guardians 2 did, it kind of just leaves things feeling very empty. I wish this movie was more than it ended up being, but I can only hope for a rebound in the third installment. I really wanted to put this movie higher because I liked it more than the first, but after analyzing things further, it only barely beats the original by a few notches. Ant-Man and the Wasp was a lot of fun and extremely fast paced, but once again suffers from a terrible villain syndrome, and when I think back on the majority of the movie, I know I liked it, but I also can't really remember it. And that's exactly why I kind of have to put it in a mid to low tier on this list. In terms of visuals, it was pretty good and expanded on a few things that the first movie set up, including giving us an evolution of Hope Van Dyne's Wasp character, more of the great Paul Rudd and Michael Peña's Luis, some cool additions like shrinking buildings and cars, and of course Jimmy Woo. But other than that short list, this 2-hour runtime movie leaves a lot to be forgotten. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it was just a very middle of the road movie for me.
What's up, guys?
Marvel's most popular superhero not only comes home, but this is his first outing in the MCU, and it was kind of just okay. I've always said that Tom Holland is a great Peter Parker Spider-Man combo, and this movie takes him back to high school, but also changes just about everything we know and love about Spider-Man. But at the same time, I can't blame them considering we've seen his origin and the same elements several times now. This was just trying to be different. But this movie did give a lot of positive changes, like the addition of Ned, Zendaya's Michelle, and more, but it also takes Spidey out of New York for a good portion of the movie when New York is very synonymous with his character and who he is. Not to mention, I have always complained and will likely continue to complain that this Spider-Man is way too involved with Iron Man. But then again, this movie also gave us a decent villain when Michael Keaton's Vulture, and connecting it to both Spider-Man and Iron Man, so it has a lot of highs, just not enough for me to put it very high on this list. The first introduction to magic in the MCU, and it was fairly decent. I can't say that I'm a massive Doctor Strange fan, as I knew very little things about this character going into the movie, but I have revisited this one a couple times casually, and overall I enjoy it. It brings a fresh perspective on things, and much like Guardians of the Galaxy, is able to stand fairly well on its own, but still has some subtle MCU pieces throughout. I will say that the visuals of this movie are very well done, despite the often kaleidoscope-like feeling it gave me, but it rarely feels boring despite it being an origin movie filled with classic tropes. Doctor Strange also gets a lot of flack for the Ancient One and a few other decisions that were made, which I wholeheartedly agree with, but for me it works okay, it is what it is. It's a very face value movie that doesn't give any real shocks or surprises, but it's a fun movie to put on the background or revisit every so often. Often called Avengers 2.5, Captain America Civil War brought back most of the Avengers you know and love and pits them against one another. It also introduced us to Spider-Man and Black Panther into the MCU. Yet despite having all these pieces for an amazing movie on paper, it fell way short with some heavy-handed plot points, often not so great CGI, and perhaps one of the ugliest set locations for an epic fight between Earth's mightiest heroes. And it is all kicked off yet by another lackluster villain that is quickly forgotten in the fray until the movie goes back to him and you remember, oh yeah, this guy started all this. Why did he do that again? It's a good movie, but not one I find myself eager to revisit for the entire runtime, but rather skip through the greatest moments and you get the gist just fine. I know what you're thinking, how dare I put the OG of OGs at number 11? And yes, my distaste for Iron Man may have hindered my judgment in putting it at this position, but the first Iron Man did give us a lot of now iconic moments in quotes, but going back to it, there's just a fine layer of cheese on top of this movie, and a villain that started a very strong trend in the MCU of mediocre villains. Yes, Iron Man gave us a lot of good, but we also only seem to remember those good parts and not the stuff in between. And by the way, this is hands down the best Iron Man suit in my opinion because it felt like it was tangible despite it being obviously CGI. It looked real, it felt real, and that's why Iron Man was so cool, because it felt like something that we, the normal people of society, could obtain or build ourselves. Don't get me wrong, Iron Man is a good movie and a great start to the MCU, but it just isn't the best by a long shot.
You didn't see that coming.
How many of you are surprised that this movie ranks so high on my list? Like, be honest, let me know in the comments. But after revisiting Avengers Age of Ultron, I was extremely surprised. It's a fairly coherent movie with a decent villain that often gets forgotten, which I think is really strange that how decent villains are often forgotten, and it's either the really terrible or the really amazing ones that get remembered. Anyway, where I think this movie fell so far for so many was thanks to its predecessor, which was an amazingly fun, action-packed visual spectacle. And I would dare say that this one is almost as good, but because it lives in the shadow of the first, it's often pandered. Nonetheless, all your favorite Avengers return, and a few new members, which are now more important than ever, join the team. Plus, this was the first time the Avengers truly lost in Sokovia and deeply impacted the future of the MCU as a whole.
Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker. What the?
Spidey once again leaves New York and takes one step closer to becoming the new Iron Man in this sequel, but it's also loaded with good stuff. First off, a great villain with an albeit yet another connection to Iron Man. but played by the brilliant Jake Gyllenhaal as one of the most underrated Spidey villains makes this one of the best Spider-Man movies for me. Realistically, I could have done without the whole Night Monkey bit, but I did enjoy the Euro trip aspect of it and Peter having to really balance his life on the go. Plus, this movie has some spectacular visuals, action, and overall is just an enjoyable movie, not to mention the massive cliffhanger that we have still yet to see the consequences and ramifications from as of the recording of this video. Nonetheless, it's a good movie that I had a lot of fun watching.
I can do this all day.
I personally wanted to put this much higher on my list as I really enjoyed the first Cap movie probably more than most. It had a very unique style similar to that of Indiana Jones or classic hero type movies and blew me away with some of the visuals that they were able to achieve, such as Skinny Steve Rogers. It even has the benefit of an interesting villain, but because he is very one-dimensional, he often seems to be forgotten, though he is by no means the worst MCU villain. But the first Avenger gave us amazing Cap moments and a sick song that still gets stuck in my head to this day with the Star-Spangled Man. Captain America: The First Avenger is just a classic action movie that you are invested in when watching, but quickly gets lost in the shuffle of all the other great MCU movies. I honestly didn't expect to see a Thor movie so high on this list, but Thor Ragnarok changed not only my mind, but the minds of most Marvel fans. And much like Guardians of the Galaxy, this space adventure is very unique in its style, humor, action, and just about every other category. Thor Ragnarok also never really feels boring. It takes you out of the greater MCU that we've seen Thor in and gives a fresh new perspective to his character while simultaneously giving us new and existing character stories to care about. And even in its slower moments, it finds a way to bring some form of humor or heart to the experience, which is truly a specialty of its director Taika Waititi. I feel like I'm always hesitant when it comes to deciding if I want to watch this movie, but the second it starts to the time it ends, I just enjoy every single aspect of it. I consider Guardians of the Galaxy to be my freshest pick of the MCU. This space adventure introduced us to characters no one knew about, had a killer soundtrack that I still listen to this day, and stands very much on its own apart from the MCU despite some early Thanos additions. I always have a great time watching Guardians of the Galaxy, and because it has so many more pros than cons, it's fairly easy to overlook them when you're having so much fun. Plus, there's a character for just about everyone that they can relate to, whether you're more snarky, funny, just the quiet one that's trying to do weird stuff, trying to be the musclehead. There's basically something for everyone in this movie. It's also one of the best Marvel movies visually by showing us things we hadn't seen before in a fun, unique way that never feels boring. Plus, there's all the Easter eggs in this movie that have been found, and that one secret one that supposedly hasn't been found yet adds a certain fun element to this story. Now, before we get into my top 5, I quickly wanted to pause, just say thank you very much for watching this video, joining me on this journey once again, but I also wanted to tell you to go ahead and go down in the comments, leave me your list of your top 5, and then we'll go ahead and compare at the very end, see how close we got, leave a second comment letting me know just how far off we were. I'm very interested to find out. But without further ado, let's get into the top 5 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. This is the first time we got to see the Marvel heavyweights not only go toe-to-toe, but also have a common enemy and a threat at the end. The Avengers is honestly just a classic. From story to visuals to action, it's one of the most fun movies to date in the entire MCU for me. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have its problems, but it certainly has been perhaps the most influential on this list with the most staying power. And despite my complaints about it being an overly bright movie, I have to say it's probably one of the best, if not the best looking Marvel movie to date, and holds up in just about every single category. Like, watching this movie from 2012 looks so crystal clear and even better than the most recent Marvel movie, and it still blows my mind. The Avengers is a great movie. Whether you want to put it on in the background or revisit it every so often, you'll never have a bad time watching this movie.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
When this movie first came out, I was not as enthused with it as other people had been because I was such a fan of the stylized first Avenger. On rewatch, however, it finally clicked why so many people like this movie. It's genuinely a fantastic action thriller. From the action set pieces to the introduction of the Winter Soldier, the threat of Hydra's return, Captain America's burden by trying to catch up to the modern day, Sam Wilson coming into the picture, and so much more, this movie is one of the most coherent of the MCU in my opinion. I only wish that Black Widow could have followed a bit more closely closely to this grounded Marvel film because it's more of her character style, and yet she somehow shines more in this movie than in her own. But the Winter Soldier not only stands on its own, but it fits very well into the overall MCU at the same time, which I think is only a testament to the brilliance of this movie.
I never freeze.
I'm not sure if this is a controversial pick at number 3 or not, but I'm putting it here anyway. This is one of those inspires a generation movies that appeals to so many and has very unique style and approach that feels so refreshing. Chadwick Boseman crushed this movie in every way possible. What really sold this movie for me was how, although there's a lot of fantastic elements that seem over the top, it kind of just feels real. The nation of Wakanda, its government, its people, its technology, all somehow feel tangible despite its absurdity. And on top of that, it was able to be and continues to be an inspiration to so many even before the loss of Chadwick Boseman. Plus, the action and visuals are a lot of fun despite the heavily critiqued final fight. Even the villain is great, and his pursuit of the Wakandan throne is one of the better Marvel villain storylines. Black Panther is one I always find myself enjoying and getting excited during it again and again for various reasons, even though I've seen it dozens of times by now.
With all 6 stones, I could simply snap my fingers. They would all cease to exist. I call that mercy.
I mean, come on, this was part 1 of the finale of the epic saga that was the Infinity Saga of the MCU. We saw the loss of some of our favorite characters and it sucked walking out of that theater on such a low, but the journey was worth the destination. Thanos finally arrives in his full glory, and not only is it epic, but it legit changes everything, not only for Marvel, but for movies in general. Infinity War set a benchmark for what movies can be, and although such a feat may never be reached again in our lifetimes, it's an absolute spectacle and is always great to revisit time and time again. The visuals, interconnecting storylines, all converging to stop Thanos, the sacrifices made and the losses incurred are devastating, but this is one of those movies that just has the most staying power. Yes, you need a lot of the prior knowledge and buildup of the MCU movies, and if you watch this out of context will likely totally be lost, but it's such a good movie and has so many moving pieces that the fact it was able to be pulled off is amazing within itself. And now, finally, for the epic, the best of the best, the number 1 Marvel Cinematic Universe movie is...
Avengers! Assemble.
I feel like a lot of people won't agree with me on this one because there's such a high praise for Infinity War, and the two are very much linked to one another. But for me personally, there has never been a movie that can get me this amped up, give me chills, bring tears to my eyes, and deliver fun, action-packed story with every single viewing. Whether it be Cap picking up Mjolnir, the on your left portal return of those lost in the snap, and so many epic moments that I can't even wrap my mind around, I can make a full list moment by moment of epic things that happen in this movie that just make me so happy. Plus, I'm an absolute sucker for time travel, and the whole time heist aspect of the Avengers having to try and gather the Infinity Stones through time and having to go back to certain points we had previously seen in the MCU, which gives a whole new perspective on even those minor of moments. I can't begin to describe how happy this movie makes me, from a comic book nerd standpoint and a movie enthusiast. It's able to hit so many beats for me personally that I feel like it just can't be beat. Not just for the achievement it was able to accomplish, but also how genuinely it brings out all the stops to make an absolutely epic movie. So there you have it, 24 weeks of work, 24 Marvel movies ranked from worst to best. Let me know what you thought about my list. Let me know your personal rankings down in the comment section down below. Maybe not the whole list, but if you want to give me like top 5, top 10, whatever you want to give me, I would love to see your list and see and compare what we liked more or less than others. But this has been an absolutely epic journey. Thank you so much for joining me, whether you were in the videos or like joining me watching them or just watched it, popped in on this video. I greatly appreciate you joining and subscribing if you haven't already, hitting the like button if you haven't already, ringing the bell notification if you haven't already. But if you also want more nerdy content from me, be sure to check out my videos on the Animated Apparel Company YouTube channel, where we do all sorts of awesome stuff. I have new videos all the time. We're doing live stream watch parties. It's so much fun. Make sure to give them a subscribe and a like as well. And even head over to animatedapparelcompany.com for all your awesome nerdy merch from Marvel, DC, Star Wars, anime, gaming, and so much more. And you can even use my personal code Aaron20 to get 20% off your order. But other than that, this has been the Avengers Endgame of videos for me. Well, hopefully not. Hopefully I don't decline heavily after this, but I will be back. I don't know how soon of making videos. I don't know if I'm going to do another series yet or what the case may be. Either way, I really do appreciate you joining me on this absolutely insane journey. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, subscribing, hanging out with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the next video.